challenge excessive corporate power, strengthen American democracy, Republican self-government, and last but not least, overturn Citizens United versus the FEC. He was the Assistant Attorney General and Chief of the Public Protection Bureau in the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office, and he'll be signing copies of Corporations Are Not People, Why They Have More Rights Than You Do, and What You Can Do About It. After he speaks, please make welcome to the Slow Money stage, Jeff Clements.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks to all of you. At Free Speech for People, we are challenging corporate power. We're leading and helping to lead a constitutional amendment campaign across this country that will overturn Citizens United. And we're doing so in order to drive the political, cultural, legal will to make and clear the way for the kind of vision, the beautiful vision, that all of you are doing so much to make real here today. The effect will not be merely reactive to Citizens United, but will put an end to the perversion that corporations have the same rights as human beings in our republic. And that's a good thing. And we're going to end the domination of big money in our political system. I'd like to talk first today about why this strategy, why this movement is so necessary, and then talk about how it is progressing. And first, why? So, as usual, Wendell Berry was here first. Nearly 10 years before Citizens United, and the Supreme Court and Citizens United declared that the biggest global corporation is just like a human being when it comes to funding our elections and electing our politicians. Wendell Berry identified the central challenge to fulfilling the kind of vision that drives slow money and so much of our work together. He said then, the massive ascendancy of corporate power over the democratic process is the most ominous development since the end of the Second World War. And nearly 10 years before that, so going back now 20 years, Wendell Berry almost precisely described the dynamic of corporate power, money power, and oligarchy that Citizens United makes explicit and even celebrates. He wrote, "This economic system embodied in multinational corporations has discovered that if you control people's choices, where they will work, what they will eat, the genetic makeup of their crops and animals, then why should we worry about freedom of speech? If nobody can be elected who is not wealthy," he wrote, "and if nobody can be wealthy without dependence on this corporate economy, then what is your vote worth?" Thus, Mr. Berry said, the citizen becomes an economic subject. Now, where are we 20 years later, after Citizens United has removed the last, almost pitiful barrier to complete control of our government and our lives by the largest corporations and those few who control and are enriched by them? In last fall's election, a handful of people and corporations spent between $6 and $7 billion to decide which issues mattered, which candidates mattered, what politicians would do once elected, and more to the point, what they would not do once elected. Now, 80% of those political contributions come from just 0.5% of the people. Not 1%, but 1/2%. One of those people is Sheldon Adelson, the owner of a global corporate casino empire, the real casino empire. He alone contributed $92 million to super PACs in the election. Only 200 people were responsible for 75% of the super PAC individual contributions. And in total, 1,900 people in a country of 310 million made up 97% of the super PAC money in the last election. Richmond, California, a community of 100,000 people who live in the shadows and the harm of one of Chevron's worst oil refineries, one that sent thousands of Richmond residents to area hospitals in last August when the refinery had an explosion. In this local city council election in a community of 100,000 people, Chevron funneled $1.2 million into the election to decide to make sure that the city council answered to Chevron, not the residents and citizens of Richmond. So if we have national, state, even local elections funded and decided by casino billionaires and fossil fuel corporations, we should not be surprised by what we get as a result. And I know you know this, but let's run through some of those results. We have record historic wealth inequality and economic instability. The global climate catastrophe, the environmental catastrophe accelerates, and our government does nothing. And worse than nothing, our government subsidizes heavily, provides military empire to increase the power and control of the fossil fuel corporations, while imposing high hurdles on alternative energy, or what we might want to start calling sane energy. And let me give you an example in Massachusetts, where I'm from. Cape Wind proposed the first in the nation offshore wind power project in 2001. It was viable, funded, ready to go, except for permitting. 12 years later, we're still waiting for construction to begin, even though 80% of Massachusetts people support this project. 12 years later, trying to get permits and approvals, construction of this offshore wind project, first in the nation, still not begun. Meanwhile, we look south to the Gulf of Mexico. 2 years after the horrendous BP explosion, the Deepwater Horizon drilling, offshore drilling rig, killed 11 people, destroyed vast habitats of the Gulf, we have twice as many oil drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico than we did then 2 years ago. Twice as many. And how did BP get its approval to do what it did with the Deepwater Horizon? It submitted an application to the federal government in February 2009, and at the time, BP was a criminal. It had a series of felonies for environmental violations of law and worker safety violations of law. Yet the government asked no questions and approved it in less than 50 days. And what about our food? We know about that here at Slow Money, and certainly, but we're the only democracy in the world where corporations have successfully used the People's Constitution to strike down GMO labeling laws. It happened in Vermont. Vermont passed a GMO labeling law in more than 10 years ago, actually, challenged as a violation of corporate speech, corporate rights, and the courts used the same theory that was used in Citizens United to strike it down. And last month, of course, as many know, Monsanto snapped its fingers, Congress jumped and quickly passed what people are calling the Monsanto Protection Act, which prevents American courts from doing what our courts are duty-bound to do, issue injunctions and relief when Monsanto breaks the law. There's much more, and don't worry, I won't go on that vein, because I know it's relatively easy for all of us, even as it is alarming, to see a future looming global catastrophe, cascading series of environmental die-offs and irreversible collapses, destabilizing and impoverishing economic crisis, spreading resource wars. But we also know, or we wouldn't be here today, that we see a much brighter future trying to come into focus. One with human-scale health systems, food systems, energy systems, financial, economic systems, relocalized, resilient communities connected to a more global and a more sustainable, peaceful, and just global community. And that's the work so many of you do, and that's what Free Speech for People and our constitutional amendment campaign are all about, helping to make that vision possible in our country. And we're doing it by bringing Americans of divergent views, widely divergent views, together over a basic fundamental proposition of human equality and self-government. And although that is what we have been founded on, this isn't easy, and I won't pretend it is. Amending the Constitution is hard. That's why we've only done it 27 times. But we can look at that 27 times as an indication of the possible of this. And we have to remember that, actually. We have to remember our history, our Constitution is marked by the memory and actuality of great shifts that would have seemed as improbable and as challenging as the high stakes and deep challenge that face us today. We know that deep change does not happen in a nice, smooth, linear progression. We know it comes in sharp bursts forward in a dynamic and surprising process of systemic shifts, of fractures between the old and the new worlds. And the forces of vision begin to break through, even when the power of the old seems more entrenched, more strong than ever before. And this is true even when the new seems unlikely and an impossible dream. Consider, all men are created equal. Human beings endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We the people, in order to ensure justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and establish a union. These terms, to pursue happiness, domestic tranquility, establish justice as organizing principles of society. When that was written in 1776 and 1787, the entrenched power at the time, if they said such things at the time, would have said, what have these people been smoking? But we did it. Empires fell, kings fell, and the long, hard road started. And we know that by 1856, the system, the monstrosity of human slavery, that legal and economic monstrosity, was more entrenched than ever, stronger than ever, and reflected in the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which said, in effect, in words, slavery was unassailable, it was not subject to change, it would never be changed, and in the shameful words of the Supreme Court, the African has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. Only a few years later, the same Supreme Court declared there's no right to vote in the Constitution, and said so in order to deny women's right to vote, and said no argument as to women's need of suffrage therefore can be considered. So in the Gilded Age, then beginning, an age when corporate power massed and patriarchy was at its height, Americans had no right to elect senators, they were appointed. Women had no right to vote. The Supreme Court struck down the very idea of a federal income tax. The court struck down child labor laws. The court struck down worker safety laws. The court struck down early environmental laws under a theory that corporations were persons with freedom of contract, so-called. Yet within a generation, that was all swept away. Americans made a movement and drove 4 constitutional amendments in the space of 10 years. 4 constitutional amendments that helped drive massive cultural, legal, political, and economic shifts. And we now have that kind of opportunity if we seize it. When Citizens United was decided, the court once again loudly, clearly announced a status quo of inequality and oligarchy that most Americans know deeply is simply wrong. And as before, Americans by the millions are saying, I don't think we can live with this, and they're getting up to do something about it. Which brings me to how are we progressing on this great campaign, this building movement for the 28th Amendment? Well, we're making so much progress that I think we have to say this is not impossible, it is possible, and therefore we can't take a pass, because look what is happening across the country. 500 cities and towns across the country have passed resolutions demanding the 28th Amendment to reverse Citizens United, overturn corporate constitutional rights, and end the domination of big money in our government. 500 cities and towns. 12 states have now passed similar resolutions. 12 states, and calling as a matter of state policy for a constitutional amendment that will restore our rights, the people's rights, to set the rules for corporations, to set the rules for our economy, and to set the rules for our elections so they're free and fair. And these are not simply blue state versus red state. This does not break down like that, and that is the great opportunity. It's happening across the country. The latest state was West Virginia, and then let me tell you what happened in Montana last election. Montana's a state that voted 55% to elect Mitt Romney as president. But they also had on the ballot the same day a ballot initiative instructing Montana representatives that it is the policy of the people of Montana that corporations are instruments that the people will make the rules for, and they don't have constitutional rights, and that the people can and will regulate political spending to ensure political equality for all, and then not asking but instructing Montana's elected representatives to work to pass the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It passed, and it passed with 75% of the vote in Ontario. Even Congress is getting the message. 100 members of Congress have now co-sponsored constitutional amendment resolutions, and the momentum is growing every day. But we can't win without your help. So if you want to get involved, go to freespeechforpeople.org or the other great organizations doing this work. I hope you'll read Corporations Are Not People, and get in touch with me, talk with your neighbors. I know many of you are already involved. Double down on this effort, because we can do this. It's a long road. And to be sure, part of this road is that protest that endures that Wendell Berry described. That protest that is moved by a hope far more modest than that of public success. The hope, rather, of preserving qualities in one's heart and spirit that would be destroyed by acquiescence. But we are also moved by a more ambitious hope, a less modest hope, frankly. We are moved by a faith that what we do matters, that what we think, say, and most importantly, act upon has always helped to catalyze improbable, almost unimaginable change from a broken, corrupt system to a world of new possibility, and that we can do so again in our time. Thank you very much.